thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. Download the app today.
This is Up for a Chat with your hosts, Cindy O'Meara and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Cindy O'Meara.
And I'm Kim Morrison, and what a delight it is for us this week to be sharing the stage with the beautiful Dr. Maria Zuschmann. Now, this beautiful soul is known as Dr. M, and she is a chiropractor, a speaker, an author, a podcaster. She's also a stress adaptation and performance coach. This woman is an absolute wealth of information, and in particular, we love her approach to stress and life design, and we are so pumped and excited to have you on the show. Welcome, beautiful Maria.
Oh, thanks so much, Kimmy, and thanks so much, Cindy. It's a joy and a pleasure to be back on the mic with you both.
Well, it's certainly been way too long, and we love it.
Isn't it just?
Yeah, and I'm excited about what you do. I just can hardly wait to hear all about it.
Dr. M, what led you to getting down this pathway into health and wellness and coaching?
Oh, goodness, how long's a podcast, ladies? That's the first question. I'll keep it brief, but basically, in a nutshell, is that I grew up in a household with a dad that was pretty sick from when I was little, actually. I can remember very distinctly my dad's second heart attack, but it was the first heart attack that he had when by the time I was born, and it was sports carnival day, actually, because I can remember Mum being on the phone. It was a landline back in the day. Remember the phones that were attached to the walls? It was that sort of phone, and she was on the phone to the hospital, and unbeknownst to my big brother and I, Mum had actually been at the hospital through the night with Dad because he'd had a heart attack. And fast forward, he had his first stroke when I was 14. And it was through that period that I really realized I wanted to be able to help people. And when I was 14 and Dad had that stroke, it was serendipitous, not serendipitous, random but not random. He ended up going to see a chiropractor to help with his neurological rehabilitation. And at that point, I was playing heaps of sport. I played rep cricket, rep hockey, and what was happening for me is I was rolling my ankles every quarter, which was devastating as a kid that was playing rep sport. And Mum happened to say to Dr. Ken Gunn, "Can you do anything for ankles?" To which he said, "Yep, bring Maria in." And I'll never forget when I went to see Dr. Ken, because on the way out the door, my big brother, who's a medical specialist, and at that point, Andrew was in his second year of his medical degree, I believe, if my timeline is right. And he put the fear of frickin' God into me. He's like, "Whatever you do, don't let them touch your neck." And I went, "Why?" And he went on a big tangent. Anyway, I went in to see Dr. Ken. Of course, the first thing he checked was my neck, and he explained to me the feedback loop from my brain down to my ankles probably wasn't working so well. I had awesome hand-eye coordination back then, and I had very poor coordination from the feedback loop from my feet back up to my head. And he checked my neck, he checked my ankles, and I never rolled my ankles after that point. And on the way out of that very first visit, Dr. Ken actually said to me, he said, "What do you want to do when you leave school?" And unbeknownst to me at the time, not realizing it was somewhat offensive to say this to a chiropractor, I said, "Oh, I want to be a physiotherapist." And he said back to me, "Perhaps you should think about chiropractic." Anyway, it really seeded a big thought process for me. And fast forward to finishing high school and deciding chiropractic was for me, particularly after a really bad lower back injury when I was 16 playing cricket, and being helped into the chiropractor at the time's office and walking out quite fine. I thought, that's freaking cool. I want to do that when I grow up. So I then, in my early 20s, had a really big stress response myself. My dad passed away when I was 22 after a series of illnesses throughout my teenage years. And it was after Dad passed away, I put on 30 kilos really fast, and I started actually getting pain down my left arm. And at that point, after a series of different medical doctor appointments, it really came down to the fact that my body had a massive stress response. Not surprisingly, my dad had just passed away. But through the medical paradigm, none of that was getting addressed. And it wasn't until I started addressing things proactively and actually restoring what was happening within my system that I got well. And within 6 months, that it took between seeing a cardiologist about what was happening to my heart and an endocrinologist to figure out what was going on with my cortisol levels at the time, I'd actually turned things around through natural means. I was then seeing a chiropractor more for corrective care. I had seen a biochemist that was restoring my gut, and it really set me on the path to be able to help people proactively. So I graduated as a chiropractor when I was 28. I ended up in a practice that was very corrective based, and I got forced to run workshops, which then sent me on a different path of really loving teaching people. And so these days, I'm sitting in my beautiful integrative chiropractic practice in Alexandria in Sydney, which Kim has had the pleasure of visiting. Cindy, next time you're in town, I'd love you to come and visit. And I get to help people hands-on to bring their body into alignment, to allow their innate intelligence to actually flow better through their whole system. And I also get to teach and speak around Australia about stress adaptation, about resilience, about how to actually work out quickly whether your body's showing you signs and signals of stress that are actually stopping you from performing at your best in your own unique way. So that's how I got to where I am now. I could keep going, but I probably should let you ladies have a chat with me in my monologue as well.
I loved your monologue. I thought it was brilliant. What a beautiful, succinct way of telling us how you got into chiropractic. Is your brother a medical doctor?
He sure is. He's a obstetrician and gynecologist. So he's one of the leading obstetricians and gynecologists in Australia, actually.
And how do you, with very differing philosophies, I would assume, how do you guys get on?
These days, very well. Kim had the pleasure of meeting my big brother actually at my wedding in November. So Kim can perhaps talk about our dynamic from an outsider's point of view. My big brother and I are very opinionated as individuals. So I would say as teenagers and as kids, we were always at each other. Our parents very much taught us to have our own opinions and to respect each other's opinions as well. So I think over the years, as I realised when to pick my battles with Andrew and when not to. And one of the things, and I'm sure many people that watch us from the outside can attest to, is that I just learned over the years not to try and push my agenda with Andrew, but just to live my life. And I do that in all areas. I don't push my agenda with anybody. I just live my life according to my own values. And it's really been amazing, particularly over the last few years, to see how much he's been watching over the years and how much he takes on for himself when it suits him and when it's his idea.
It's interesting that, that when you show by example, then you do influence family and friends and communities. So I think example rather than telling is a far greater and more powerful way of teaching, as opposed to, like I love how you said you picked your battles. So obviously the way you pick your battle is just showing. And it is by example. I want what she's got. How come she's doing that? So I think it's wonderful. He would be in a fairly stressful situation a lot of the time. How does your information about, stress adaptation performance coaching, as you do, how has that flowed into his life and other people's life? And what is it that you teach and how do you teach it? And what are the parameters of it? I know there's a million questions there, but I'm absolutely intrigued in how you do this.
Okay, well, as far as my big brother goes, that's probably a separate conversation because until somebody asks me for help, I actually don't offer it. So he's started adding things in along the way at his own time because I'm not sure what your guys' dynamic is with siblings, but ours has been interesting over the years, and we've actually become really good mates over the last few years. So our mum passed away at the end of 2020, and pre-mum getting really sick, which really her cancer kicked off in 2018, but she got quite unwell towards the end of 2019. And up until that point, we'd been running quite a separate race, if you like, with mum in the support that we were giving her. And then we realised that mum was telling us both whoppers. My mum could bullshit with confidence with the best of them. So there was a moment in time where I realised that she was telling Andrew something different to what she was telling me. So we then combined pretty serious forces because my brother and I, as separate entities, are a force to be reckoned with, put us together and look out to actually help mum in particularly the last 8 to 10 months of her life, earthside. So across that point of view, I don't really help Andrew with that because he's never actually asked me for help. However, I do know that he's joined in on some of the activation meditation nights that we've had that I've held at MRC with one of my business partners and collaborators on Ziva Life Collective, which is a retreat that we run. Pauline Wen has been running activations, and Andrew has rescheduled things to be here. I never thought he was interested in it. And when I offered him to come, he's like, yep. And he crossed off his appointment book and moved meetings so that he could be here. So in terms of how I help other people, though, is there's some really easy resources that you're up for the chat listeners can actually jump onto. So on my Aligned You website, I have my body stress score quiz, which I used to call it my 8-ball quiz, but it's evolved over the years, as has most things that I do. And it goes through a quiz where it actually can break down 8 different areas of your physical signs that can be showing if your body is adapting well or not so well to stress. So I like simplifying things as much as possible. So I have a variety of different tools that I've talked about, whether it's in my book or in teachings that I do, when it's particularly around stress adaptations, of the importance of simplifying what's going on in your world. Categorizing things into the various stresses that are going on in your world. There's really, as you guys would know, there's 3 different stresses. There's chemical, physical, or emotional. But sometimes in a overcomplicated world, we like to overcomplicate things by looking at all the 50 or 60 different worries that we might have going on. And so I really like being able to simplify it into those 3 areas. And then again, into one of the tools that I've been teaching now, I was actually talking about on my podcast this week, which is the Worry-O-Meter, which is a simple tool that allows you to categorize things into things you can control or perhaps things that you can't control. And if they're things that sit in the middle of you, not really sure whether you can or can't, is to make sure you're engaging somebody like myself or somebody like you awesome humans to actually help you assess whether you can or can't control them. So for me, to answer your question as succinctly as possible, Cindy, is that the way that I help people is actually help them simplify what's going on in their life, to automate as much as possible throughout your day so that things become routine or ritual, and it allows so much more bandwidth to be able to do the things that you love and to add creativity and spontaneity into your life if the simple things are actually automated.
So what if the stress has come from a trauma and not, your life might be simple, but a trauma's happened? Like I obviously you've been through 2 major traumas in the loss of your parents and probably more traumas that you haven't spoken about. But how do you take that stress away from someone who's in trauma and hasn't dealt with that trauma?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, I've been at both ends. I'll take the deaths of my parents because they happened at really different points in my life. So let's take my dad passing in my early 20s. I would say that paralyzed me for at least 2 years. I can remember 2 years later in my early 20s, remember laughing for the first time, really. Like I'd chuckled at things, but I hadn't found anything funny for, I reckon, about 2 years. And that was because back then I didn't have the tools that I certainly have now or had when my mum actually transcended and left Earthside. So, I mean, you can even hear it in the language that I use, is that back then it was very much a death in the family. I was traumatized by it because that was what I thought I was meant to do as in my early 20s when I didn't have the maturity or the knowledge that I have now or gone through the various evolutions that I have now. Whereas when Mum passed in 2020, it was actually one of the most beautiful times in my life. And I actually spoke to it on Kim's podcast. Back then, it was actually quite raw when we spoke, Kimmy, on your podcast about it. But I actually approached the whole thing really differently. In that period of time, I suppose for want of a better way of putting it, I had my spiritual awakening, and not from a religious point of view, more for a connectedness point of view of how I connect to the universe and that it's all part of a life cycle. And I had a choice. I could either be really sad and cross and bitter with the world as my mum, who was my best friend and my rock and the matriarch of our family, as she was coming to the end of her Earthside journey, or I could actually choose to actually double down on all my self-care so that the stress of what was going on at the time, because I'm not going to pretend it wasn't stressful, it was fucking devastating. But I doubled down on all of my self-care throughout that period so that my body was in the best possible state to deal with and adapt to what was going on around it. And one of the most stressful things about what happened when Mum passed, because I wouldn't call it traumatic when Mum passed, I would call it part of her life cycle, and it was a really beautiful time, was actually dealing with other people's expectations, because they expected me to be a lot fucking sadder than what I was, and they expected me to be this dutiful daughter that stopped going to work. I'm not sure who they thought were paying my bills, because at that point I was single and starting a new practice back in Sydney. But that was actually the most stressful thing, was dealing with other people's expectations. And I would say that my grieving process was, relatively speaking, very fast because I chose it to be that way. So I guess my answer to your question, Cindy, is what if it's traumatic? Well, and there's obviously a various range and spectrum of what sort of traumas people go through. But I do think there's an element of choice of how we actually want to deal with it and how long we want to stay suffering in that trauma, or whether we want to be able to heal and repair from it as quickly as possible and understand the signs and signals and the impact it's having on our body. Because each one of us could actually go through the same trauma and we actually respond super differently to it. One, because either we're actually dealing with it really unconsciously and we're not actually dealing with it as such, or we're not trying to heal from it because maybe we don't know that we could. Or we're consciously actually deciding to go through it in a particular way and stay in the suffering from it, or we're making a choice to going, you know what, I get it, this shit's happened to me. I can either stay in it and ruminate in it for longer than I need to, or I can actually take all the steps possible to heal and repair as quickly as possible so I actually can keep on living my best possible life.
So I know of people who have released trauma in different ways. So it might be through breath work. It might be through network, that chiropractic energy release. It might be in many ways. And for me, I'm actually going to say me. So many years ago, I had my first network adjustment, which is about that, the spine rolling. And I'm happy. I figured I'm not going to do all that spine rolling. I've had chiropractic care all my life, and I actually did quite a lot in that one and first session. And then I got up from the table and I cried for 15, 20 minutes. I didn't know I had trauma. I didn't know I had anything there. What is that? What are you releasing? And is that one way that you release things, is through an energy? It doesn't matter what it is, or do you find out what it is? Sorry, I know that's probably a loaded question, but I'm intrigued by what you said in the beginning. You said, well, not in the beginning, towards the end, where you said it all depends on the human, how they deal with it and things like that. Can it be locked in your body? You know nothing about it. You don't even realize you've been through a trauma. And then when somebody releases it like that through breath work or energy work, that I don't even know the question I'm trying to ask.
That's right. Maybe I can help because
yes.
So I don't use network analysis in my practice, but one of the things I've added over the last couple of years is pop my teeth back in, BGI, which is biogeometric integration. And so what it's looking at is it's actually looking at ancient geometry and how it reflects through your system and how it reflects through your body. So we're all vibration, right? And it's just a matter of how our vibration is formed. As humans, we're in a relatively dense but flexible form. The table that I have my laptop sitting on today is in a super dense form. And when there's any stress that comes into our sphere, is one of three things actually happens. The first thing that happens is that it's a stress that our body has experienced before, for example. And so that stress comes into our system and our body goes, oh, hey, stress, I recognize you. I'm in a good enough state right now where I can integrate you. And you just get on with your day. That's what I call adapting well to stress. The second thing that can happen is that a new stress comes into your system. You've never seen it before, but you're functioning in such a great way that your body actually goes, hey, stress, haven't seen you before, but I'm flying at the moment and I can still integrate you. And then the third thing that happens is that a new stress, well, sometimes it's an old stress and your body's in a shit state right now, so it can't integrate. But let's call it a new stress comes into your sphere and your body isn't in a good enough state to deal with it. And so your body goes, oh, shit, never seen you before. And so it doesn't know what to do with it. And so it stores it. And the way I like to see it and explain it is it stores it as potential energy. And I love that shift because we can use words like trauma or we can use words like injuries or pain and symptoms, but I actually really like looking at that as potential energy because it's sitting there simmering, ready to be released. So you can, I get geeky now, let's talk about different sorts of energies, because then that potential energy can actually be released into kinetic energy and you then can use it in life. And so if you've had something that you've perhaps either you've not been aware of or that's been so traumatic, and I've looked after clients that things have been so traumatic, they have actually forgotten that they've gone through, their body has dissociated that experience completely, and it's just been stored away as potential energy for sometimes decades, and they're not necessarily aware of it, is that as we start actually bringing the system back into alignment, whether that's through structural care, which I still do that in my practice as well, is I do ironically more straight chiropractic. I've liked to make the joke that it's the only area in life I'm straight in is my chiropractic philosophy, is that in terms of when we're structurally correcting what's going on with people, is that it allows some of that stored potential energy to be released. Or if we start getting into some more of the energetic work, whether that's through the frameworks that I use through BGI, or whether you're seeing a network analysis chiropractor, or whether you are moving that potential energy through breath and actually connecting each one of your energy centers, then that's what's happening. You're having that somatic release of stress that's come into your system that hasn't been integrated properly. Does that answer your question, Cindy?
It does, but you brought me another question.
Okay. I'm ready. Go.
Yeah, what is biogeometry? Can you explain that, what you said? I didn't get fast. You were so fast, I didn't get to write it down. I think I got biogeometric
integration. So an American chiropractor, Sue Brown, actually had a massive download about this, I think a couple of decades ago. I'm relatively new to it, so there are definitely some people I can put you in touch with that can explain it a whole lot better than I can. But it is looking at the body through ancient geometry, and there's relation to it to the tree of life in terms of that geometry and how it plays through our system. And so it is looking at the fact that we are all vibration, and then actually being able to look at the system at a structural level, but also what's going on in a multiple dimension point of view as to how your system is actually moving through space, and where those areas of contraction, for want of a better way of putting it, or that potential energy is sitting to be able to release it. So and again, it's fairly new to my world, so it's something that other people can explain in a lot better detail. But that's how my brain puts it together, is it's actually looking at, okay, well, within each one of us, we've already got processes going on. So this is, say if you're coming into the practice and we were doing this work, people that are doing structural work with me, we actually start with the continuity piece, which is there's already things going on through your system when you walk in here. I look at it, and as I said, Kim's been to my practice. My practice is on quite a busy road, so it gets quite chock-a-block with traffic sometimes. So sometimes when people are coming into the practice, it's like they've got a traffic jam in their system already, and all the lights are red and there's a build-up of traffic. And so by being able to create continuity in somebody's system, it's like we're getting rid of all the traffic and turning all the traffic lights green before we actually start. It also allows for co-creation when we're actually making change, which has been a real game changer for me in practice. So I've been in practice coming up 19 years. And I would say for probably the first 15, it was very ego-driven in the sense of, I can see what's wrong with you. I'm going to just make change for you, versus particularly over the last few years, it's looking at, oh, hang on a second, that probably is not serving you at best. How can we make co-creation of change? How can your system let my system help you make change? Because then I become the facilitator of the change within your system. And so that's part of the difference with what I'm doing with people now in terms of that integration piece, is it's not just me putting my will into you, for want of a better way of describing it. It's actually bringing your body into a state where I can see and read what's happening with your system in a different way. So it's actually your body giving me permission to be able to work with it, and then being able to, your body be able to integrate, whether it's the chiropractic adjustment, whether it's the processes that are already happening through your system. And yes, there are times where people have those sorts of releases where things have been stored up for such a long period of time that it's actually become that potential energy that as it releases, sometimes it's an emotional shift, sometimes it's a physical shift, and it's your body starting to come into a better alignment so that you can be moving closer to your potential. And so that's one of the things I talk about now in practice, is that my main role is to help you release your potential. And I really love that difference from how I practiced for, as I said, for probably the first 15 years in how I work with clients, what a difference that makes to the energy that I bring into the space that is behind me from where I'm sitting today. And it's all very intentional with the energy that I create within the practice, what sort of experience I want people to have when they're coming in. And it's a joy to be able to help people in that way.
Oh, I love what you said. I just, as you were describing biogeometric integration.
Just call it BGI, Cindy. It's easier.
BGI, yeah. They're doing that in farming now. I don't know if you realise that they're starting to understand about structures and, ancient, like I think it's very Egyptian. It's part of the Egyptian scribing. I don't know if this is the same thing, but they're using it in farming right now. And I don't know enough about it. I'm just hearing it in the farming circles. And I find it fascinating that, and this has probably got nothing to do with what you're doing, but I find it fascinating how when we learn something about the human body and the vitalistic processes of the human body and how we are part of not only what's happening in our own body, but all the environment around it, as well as what's happening in the cosmos. And we are going to talk about Mercury retrograding because we do this in farming as well. I'm seeing it in the land as well. I'm seeing the farmers creating this consciousness that is far above a mechanical way of farming. And it's beautiful to actually watch. So this is my next question, is Mercury, like we use it in biodynamics. We use the sun and we use the moon and we use planets in order to know when we should plant, when we move our cattle. It's quite intriguing to watch cattle. They run by the moon. They don't run by the sun. And it's quite intriguing as to where the moon is around the earth as to when they sit down and ruminate. And you will see across the paddocks, they all start to sit down together. They all ruminate together. It's the worst time to move them, by the way, if you ever want to move them. And then slowly but surely, they all get up together and they all start eating together. It's incredible. So we said something at the beginning before we even started recording, and it was, I can't remember all the discombobulation that we were talking about. And you went, it's Mercury retrograde or something. Can you explain that? Because everyone's talking about it.
Look, astrology is not necessarily my strong suit, but what I do know is that I keep an eye on these sorts of things. And so to answer your question is, you said something along the lines of, I'm not sure if this has anything to do with what you're doing. And I think one of the beautiful things is it all has everything to do with what we're all doing, in the sense of when we look at life from a more vitalistic, holistic and a connected point of view, in terms of from energy connection. And some people might think this sounds a bit out there and but it's reality. We're all electromagnetic. We've all got electromagnetic fields around us. As I said earlier, we're all vibration. This is science. This is not woo-woo. Is that then from a sun and a moon flipping over, is that's how we all work. And I think when people get most sick or when farming doesn't work is when you go against that. Or look at the fires where, I don't know if it's popped in Queensland news, but Sydney is under a smoke haze at the moment because they're doing a whole heap of backburning and hazard reduction in inverted commas. So if I sound a bit stuffly, it's because we've been in a blanket of smoke for the last 4 days. And I don't think they're backburning with Indigenous or First Nation theories in mind, which still makes me want to slap my forehead. But, there's been eons of history of how to work with the land or how to work with our human systems to be able to be working at our best. But in terms of Mercury retrograde, it's a glitch in terms of how the planets are moving. And so what often happens, and it happens throughout the year, I have a feeling, I do have the dates written there somewhere, this Mercury retrograde ends in a couple of weeks. So it's not unusual through this time for your tech to be misbehaving. Or I had an example a few months ago where I walked into one of my local favourite cafes and I went to tap my phone to pay for my coffee, and he's like, oh my God, my FPOS machine hasn't been working all morning. I'm so sorry. And I went, oh, it's Mercury retrograde. Don't worry, let's try it again. So often it's just that I find in retrograde, it's that little tester of, are you going to get frustrated or do I just need to walk away and as you did, the start of this conversation was you were both having internet issues. Do you just need to walk away, turn it on and off, and come back to it in a couple of minutes? And so there's a beautiful quote, and I'm not quite sure whose quote it is, but it's millionaires pay no attention to astrology, but billionaires do. And I love that quote because it's something that I have various teachers in my world that are tuned into the movements of the planet and what is going to have planetary support right now and what might perhaps be putting up a little hurdle. And there was a classic example of that, actually, as I was building Mitchell Road Chiropractic, which is my gorgeous space. I started the build of that it was late Feb 2021. And I had been working with a particular practitioner that actually works in the Book of Numbers. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that before, but it actually precurses tarot. And she had pre-warned me that because we were going to be in retrograde, she said, everything will seem like it is out of order, but just flow with it. It will all fall into place. And I was like, oh, okay. And I tell you, anybody looking outside into the build of MRC would have been going, how the hell are you still standing upright? And what is going on? But we made it to actual deadline as to when we were finished, and I opened on time, and it was quite amazing. But throughout that, I actually took a lot of peace and calm as the shit was hitting the fan regularly through that period of, okay, this is just how it's meant to happen. So sometimes through different points of the year, depending on what's going on with the planets, it's going to create more flux. And we see that with other humans of when everybody's a little bit off kilter, is you go, oh, what are the moons doing right now? Oh, yeah, it's new moon. Okay, that explains it. Or it might be that it's full moon and everybody's gone nuts for a few days. And, oh, it's full moon. Don't worry about it. Carry on. It just allows me to approach life a little bit differently and with a bit more calm.
I don't think people really look at that, do they? They don't look at the cosmos. And I'm learning to look at it more and more with biodynamics. Sorry, Kimmy.
I've got to jump in.
I promise.
For goodness sake, I've got to jump in.
I was like, are you here today?
Yes.
You did say you were going first, and I'm like, maybe you guys break this up into 2 sections.
Oh, my goodness. It's insane, but it's brilliant because I'm curious from that whole, I just want to go back to the whole energy realm because a lot of the work that chiropractors do is very energy focused. And particularly when we're looking at adjustments, it's not like you're a back cracking doctor or something like this. There is a lot of energy and components to that. Then when you throw in the quantum physical realm, which is a bit like sounding to me like the BGI, when we actually look at the 0-point field of potentiality and possibility and what the body actually can do, it's quite remarkable that you've combined these two into your practice. But not all of us are chiropractors and not all of us are BGI practitioners. How can we simplify this and bring it back into our everyday where we could perhaps tap into the wisdom, the ancient knowledge of BGI, quantum physics and chiropractic?
Where shall I start?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose, look, I could be really cheeky and say to your listeners, if you're not getting checked by a vitalistic chiropractor, perhaps you should. And if you need a recommendation one, I'm very happy to be able to recommend. I've got recommendations, as I'm sure you guys do too, around Australia most definitely, and wouldn't be too hard to find people around the world either. But in terms of the beauty of what I do now, and this is something that I actually kept very separate for quite a few years, and it was creating a dissonance within myself because I started having and as I said earlier, for want of a better way of describing it, my awakening or my awareness of my spiritual side more consciously. It would be back in 2015, 2016. I would have people coming up to me, and I remember it very distinctly. In 2010, I left my first wife. Our relationship had broken down, and she was also a chiropractor. And so I went out to learn from anybody that was not a chiropractor, because as you ladies know, and some of your listeners know, chiropractic is actually quite a small profession in Australia. So if you are vitalistically inclined, you end up at all the same seminars. So I was like, oh, I'm not doing that for a while. And so I started learning from other coaches that were in different industries, but also still aligned with what it was that I wanted to do. And I would have people coming up to me, and this one particular workshop in particular really stands out, which was a 5-day workshop. This guy called Ben Harvey was running it. And this beautiful older gentleman, Keith, came up and sat next to me. And I was like, what the hell's going on? Because he sat quite close, and he leant in and he said, you're a light worker and I'm here to protect you. And back then I was like, okay, sure, and kind of sidled away from him a bit. But then he said, come and sit next to me. He had a particular, it was a rock as far as I knew at that point. Now looking back, it was probably quite a powerful crystal. But he said, come and sit next to me. And I was like, okay. Now, prior to that, I used to go into workshops, any sort of workshop. It could have been a DG, which is a massive chiropractic conference that used to get held. And I would always walk out very drained. And I didn't know why back then. And he said, I'm here to protect you. Come and sit next to me. And I used to sit in workshops like that, popping vitamin C, because if I didn't, I would walk out sick. And I didn't realize at the time what was happening energetically. But after I sat next to the strange man, Keith, who had come up and said something to me, it wasn't the first time somebody had come up to me randomly and said that. That was the first time I bounced out of that particular workshop. I was like, Now, it was a 5-day workshop, and you guys might have experienced this, where they move you around. You're not allowed to sit next to the same people all the time. And so I made sure I was within 1 or 2 seats of Keith the whole time. And it was the first time I'd ever been to something where I walked out energized versus actually walking out quite sick. And then fast forward to 2015, where I had started being more conscious about all of this. And I started doing work with Pauline, and we started running Ziva Life Collective, and I was learning more about meditation and the power of connecting to my higher self and having conversations with people about the multi-dimension. I kept it very separate from practice, because at that point, I used to preface whenever I said something like what I just said with, oh, this might sound a bit weird and a bit out there, but this is what I'm experiencing, whereas now I just say it, because it was still at a point where I didn't own all of that within me. I kind of was keeping it, as I said, all separate. And the power of what has particularly happened over the last couple of years, and I would say the last 2 to 3 years, of where I actually really am incorporating it into practice, I'm not apologizing for it anymore, is again from that showing other people how I live my life through just living my life, is that it's amazing how many people come for the ride. And so in terms of from a day-to-day, Kim, I would say simple things like connecting with nature. It sounds so simple, but get your feet onto something that is actually a natural surface. If you're in a place where you can get to see sunrise off the horizon, bloody amazing, because it actually allows you to connect with the universe and connect at a multidimensional level. And it also has so many benefits from a vitamin D perspective and a mitochondria regeneration perspective. And if meditation or mind training is not already a practice that you have, it's certainly something that I would recommend starting with. And look, when I first started teaching people this stuff, I had such an emotional trigger to the word meditation because I'd had a terrible experience with it a decade or so beforehand. I couldn't even say the word meditation. Whereas now meditation and gentle breath work is part of my day-to-day. I can do more complicated breath work, but I know for my system, it doesn't actually serve us, because my system, it tends towards stress, not calm. So I need to do more calming things. So having the right practitioner that can actually help you determine whether you actually need to actually move more energy, or whether it's actually, no, you actually do need to do some more calming things, can also be really helpful. Does that answer your question, Kim?
Yes, it's powerful. And I just love the simplicity of bringing it back, but also understanding there's different dynamics to all of our health and well-being. It's not just some physical plane. Let's talk then about your serendipity, your moments of moving through your spiritual awakening, the no accident that you launched MRC around the same time as COVID was hitting and all of that. Yet, in amongst all of that, Dr. M, you managed to fall quite head over heels in love. Can you tell us if you think Mercury retrograde was minding her own business, or was that serendipity, and how on earth did you manifest the woman of your dreams?
Oh, no, that was through a lot of research is what I called my dating time for when I first moved back to Sydney. But also I magnetized and manifested aims. It was very conscious, that whole process. So it's things that we teach in, or I teach in some of my workshops, and we definitely talk about at Ziva Life Collective and at Unio, which is our new retreat that we're running in a few weeks, actually, or in about 6 weeks, which is an all-gender retreat. But we're always magnetizing, and I love how Pauline puts this, which is we're always magnetizing. It's whether we're magnetizing shit or good stuff. And so that's where the level of consciousness comes in. So my ex and I broke up in oh God, when was it? 2018. And so when I started dating again at the end of 2019, I had decided, I wrote this really long list of who my perfect partner was. And then I had this series of dates and I had to learn how to date. I'd actually never dated, and I definitely had never online dated before. So I had to learn how to do that. And so there was a couple of years where I was dating and there were a few different people that I had fallen for, and then just the timing wasn't right. And then I had this moment where I went, oh my God, okay, that's what they're meant to be. Who the hell am I meant? Who do I want to be when I'm around this person? So I actually then wrote, and it's still in my notes in my phone, I think there's about 50 dot points to this particular list. I nutted out and defined who I needed to be to attract the woman that I wanted to be with. And how did I want to feel when I was around her? How did I want that? Like, what sort of lifestyle did I want to have? How did I want to be supported? It's a really detailed list. And when I did that, then each person I kind of went out with or that we had connected with, I kept getting closer and closer. And then finally, when I really got out of my own way, and one of the most important things that I did was I had a long history of putting everybody else first and being okay with being somebody's third or fourth priority. And that had shown up in a couple of people that I'd been dating. And when I really went, oh, hang on a second, no, I'm actually not going to do that anymore, that's when Ames actually dropped in. And it was quite funny because it was serendipitous, not serendipitous when we met. And Kim has heard this story because she actually officiated our wedding, which was a beautiful, beautiful day. But when I saw Ames for the first time on the app that we both happened to be on, as I like to joke, one is that we met the old-fashioned way on an app, and two, poor Ames didn't quite know what she was swiping right on. But when I saw Amy's photo on a particular app called Hinge, is that I was like, oh, who's that? Which was one of my new rules. Was I was sick of talking to people that just wasting my time or I wasn't really into. So my rule was if somebody didn't basically affect me catching my breath by seeing their photo, I didn't bother swiping right on. And so I saw Amy's photo and I was like, oh, who's that? And then I saw her name and I saw where she lived. And so Amy's name is Amy and my mum's name was Amy. So I had a real block at first going, oh, how do I feel about that? How do I feel about a potential future partner having the same name as my mum? And I was like, oh, well, it's not like I called Mum Amy, so okay, I can get over that. And then the next step was on this particular app, it actually has the suburb that people were in, and Ames lived in the suburb, which is Alexandria, which is where my practice is. And I was thinking, oh my God, how do I feel about that? Because on my to-do list that I had, that shopping list of my future partner, was they needed to live within 7 kilometers because I'd done long distance relationships with people in the past and just wasn't working. I was like, okay, I know I wanted them within 7Ks, but is within 1K a little bit too close? And I got over all of that and swiped right. Anyway, then there was crickets, didn't hear from her. And so that was, I think, on the Sunday. On the Tuesday morning, I happened to be walking Atlas, who's my big furry assistant, who's a nearly 9-year-old full-size Groodle. I was taking her around to the puppy park around the corner from the practice. And it was a funny morning where I was in the park about 20 minutes earlier than I usually would be. Otherwise, I would never have been there at that time. And we've walked into the park, and from 150 meters away, I went, oh, fuck, there's that hot chick from the app that hasn't swiped right on me. Oh, how embarrassing. Wanted to dive into the concrete. Atlas was already off her lead by that point. I've said to her, whatever you do, do not go over to that lady's dog, because Coco, who's now my step puppy, was there. And of course, Atlas beeline to her. And by the time I got to Ames, I'd collected myself. I'd said hi to Coco and I smiled awkwardly at Ames and kept walking, and just thought it was all quite funny. And I was heading up to Byron Bay that Friday, and I had taken the app off my phone, but I'd realised I hadn't taken my data off. So anyway, long story short, Ames had popped a message on there on the Thursday basically saying, hey, did I happen to see you in the park the other day? And really, the rest is history. So it's not by accident that I met Ames, and I'm very blessed that she came into my life. And the beautiful thing is that whilst prior to meeting Ames, when I'd met some amazing people, but when I looked at both of those lists, there were always something that I was trying to go, oh, maybe that one doesn't count, or maybe if I turn it some way, shape or form, it kind of fits. But when Ames and I got to know each other and I reviewed back over those lists, I was like, wow, every single, and I do mean every single thing, is ticked off on both lists. So definitely not just by random luck that she came into my world.
I love that. I love a good story of synchronicity, and they're meant to be in your life. And I always think, like I got to tell you about Kim and me. So my sister passed away as Kim walked into my life, and she just took over where my sister left. So and it's a longer story than that, but I just believe those people come into your life when they're meant to come into your life, and it's wonderful. I didn't marry her. We've just remained friends and
travel together.
Work wife. Well, I love it from a grieving point of view. Part of how I moved through that process with my mum so quickly was, and it was actually my mate Pauline that had put it so succinctly, was that often what we grieve when people leave Earthside is it's not necessarily them, but it's their characteristics. So who in your life or who coming into your life actually shows you the same characteristics? And it might be all combined into one person, or it might be a variety of different people. And so I actually looked at all the things that were my favourite things about my mum, and I can list out the people in my world that no one is quite like my mum, because she was a unique human, but there are absolutely a variety of people that fill those gaps that she brought into my world.
I didn't ask you this question, and now that you've brought up your mum and dad again, you said your dad was really sick. Do you know why? Could you see the patterns of his lifestyle, or?
100%. My dad was a workaholic. So my dad was a Hungarian refugee. He was 52 when I was born. So I'm a genetic experiment, Cindy. You might not have heard me telling this story before. But so my dad was Hungarian and my mum was Eurasian. So my mum was a pioneer in many, many ways. So my mum's dad was English Malay, and my maternal grandmother was French Vietnamese. So when my parents met, they were really pioneers in many ways, because they were a mixed race couple in Sydney in the mid to late 60s. And they had me when mum was 40 and dad was 52. So my dad was a very classic immigrant refugee story, which he worked really hard. He worked 5.5 days when it was 5.5 days trading. My dad had a sewing machine haberdashery material shop that back in the 80s, it was turning over nearly $1 million. He worked really hard. And his main drive in life was to provide for me and my brother, and to be able to create the life and be able to send us to private schools and give us all the things that he and mum held great value to. So he also smoked a pipe, and he functioned on stress. He'd smoked a pipe since he was 12 or 13, which is what people did back then. And he really didn't look after himself outside of work. So when it was 5.5 day trading, he worked 5.5 days. When it was 6 days, it was 6 days. And when it went to 7 day trading, he worked 7 days a week. And he had no outlets outside of work to be able to look after himself. So he'd had his first heart attack, I believe, when he was 42 or 45. He had another one when I was 8 or 9. And then he had his first stroke when I was 14. And so stress played a big role. And when I say stress, I mean the lack of integrating the stressors on his system played a great role in why dad was sick. And also I grew up watching him take a lot of pills every day, and him just actually following that path, which that was a path that he knew of at the time. And I'll never forget in my early 20s when it was figured out what was going on with my system, which it wasn't from a lack of beta blockers in my system that my heart wasn't working properly at the time, but it was because my cortisol levels were through the roof. Yeah. And I went to a biochemist who helped restore what was happening in my gut and my system. And I'll never forget, because God love my mum, she was such a sweetheart, is that the first time she went out shopping so I'm 46, this was back when I was 23, so 23 years ago. Gluten-free products weren't so easy to come by, nor were all the other things that I couldn't eat. Things like I was suggested to eat things like sheep's yogurt and things like that, not eat cow products at that point. And mum went out to do the shopping, and she came back 5 hours later because and was so apologetic because she's like, oh my goodness, I've read every single label of what we usually eat, and now this is what we now eat. And as I say to my clients now is you can't beat yourself up for what you don't know. You can only beat yourself up if you know it and you're not doing it. Then there's a time for a swift uppercut. But until you can't know what you don't know, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And that brings me to designing a life. So many people stay like your dad and just continue to do what they're doing and get the same results. Obviously, he had strokes and heart attacks and was not a well person on many medications. So you love life design. Can you tell me more about that?
For sure. Well, I think that we're either designing our life or somebody's designing it for us. So I absolutely put both my hands up to say I am a control freak, so I would much prefer to be the one designing it. So my week is planned out in advance, and the reason why it's planned out in advance and how I structure my appointment book in my practice, it's all really designed so that it allows for me to have my best possible energy. And look, I've been through times in my adult life where my energy has been shithouse because my adrenals have been under the pump and not functioning very well because of not managing my life design well. And so now I'm really specific about how do I structure my day? When is my energy best? I've actually had to go through a restructure of it because the joys of perimenopause have been affecting my sleep. So some of my early morning practices of getting out to the cliffs have had to shift because I actually still need to rest because my sleep's so interrupted. So having an awareness of what my system needs, how do I actually incorporate my self-care so I am giving myself oxygen first so that I can take best care of myself, my beautiful wife, our beautiful fur babies, and also my clients and my friends and family. I can't do my best for any of those people if I'm actually not looking after myself first. So one of the things I hear from clients often is that, oh, look, I don't actually have enough time to do any of that. And I go, really? And so there's a particular exercise that I have in my book that it actually takes you through a process of seeing how much spare time do you actually have in a week, because we've all got 168 hours in a week. When we actually take the time to nut out, what am I actually doing with that time and how could I use it better? Is I've only ever had one person that was in a deficit of time, and this particular lady was doing an MBA at the time. She was working full time. She was the primary caregiver for her kids because her husband flew in and flew out for work. She also was on a working farm that required animals to be looked after. So she's the only person I've ever met that was in a deficit of time. Everybody else has usually between 10 to 20 hours spare a week that they could be using better. So that they're filling in with scrolling through Facebook, or not saying that's a bad thing, I do it too. I'm just aware of how much I'm doing it, or watching lots of telly, or just not utilizing their life as best as they could. So from that life design point of view is that actually looking at how you're structuring your week, where are the moments in time that you could actually grab back from areas that are perhaps not serving you so well, and you could actually redistribute them into areas that are going to serve you better. I'm very aware of who I spend my time with these days. I curate who I hang out with on, particularly outside of work. And if they're not people that bring me joy and increase my vibration, I actually choose not to hang out with them. I'm much better now at saying no. I was having a chat to a mate of mine who's also a photographer who Kim met and kept telling him to get the shot at our wedding. I was actually chatting to Mark Nolan yesterday, and we were talking about, I had dropped a particular point of wisdom, and he said, thanks, that's awesome. I said, I have my moments from time to time. I'm just much more choosy with who I give those moments to these days. And I think for a lot of people, we've been taught that we've got to give our time to everybody else before we give it to ourselves. And I would actually say the reverse. You need to make sure you're giving yourself time first so you can actually be at your best for everyone else.
So powerful. And I so remember that wedding. I had so much fun hiding in your room and shooting a video to send to you too, and thought I was so clever with my reels. But it was an exquisite wedding, very high energy, high class, and just a beautiful, beautiful moment for me. And I just want to publicly thank you for choosing me to be a part of that with you both. And one of the things that you talked about there, which was capturing the moment. And you and I have had some wonderful times together. And I also loved what you said before. Sometimes it's really good to learn from people outside of what you already know. And one thing we shared together was the power of public speaking together down there in Sydney. And that really, I would say, really condensed and made us both really appreciate the friendship we have. Our final question to you is about connection and these important connections and people that we have in our life to fuel us so that we live our best life. How do you think the world now, even though we're more wired than ever before, we seem to be more disconnected than ever before? How would you recommend to this beautiful Up for a Chat listener how to connect more into living a full and happy, joyful life with those moments that are special and precious with those people that you choose to spend time with? And then also, perhaps, gorgeous girl, you could share with us not only your podcast, your practice, but all your socials. What's your final message to this beautiful listener? And if you can incorporate the idea of connection.
So one of the beautiful things and one of the many special moments that we've had together, Kim, was, goodness, I think it was about 4 years ago. We talk about serendipity of Ames coming into my life, but you were always going to marry me. I just didn't know who the woman was yet, because I actually told you over drinks at the Opera Bar, I reckon it would be about 4 or 5 years ago, that you, well,
with
must have been about 2019, with oysters and champagne, which is fairly standard if you come and have a meal with me, folks, is that, it's a true story, is that you would be marrying me. I just needed the right woman to drop in. So that's how you ended up at our wedding. And it was actually part of the decision process of when we were getting married. I actually had said to Ames, I already know who's marrying us. And she was like, okay. And you were actually the first person that we checked the date with, because if you couldn't have done the date that we wanted to get married on, which we actually got married a year later to the day of when we saw each other in the puppy park for the first time. But in terms of that connectedness piece, is that one of the best ways to stay connected to self is to not play the compare game with everybody else. And I think, to your point of we're so connected in so many different ways. Actually, my podcast from a few weeks ago was all about if we're overconnected, does it create disconnect? And so the first thing I'd say to your listener is check in and self-audit. Where and whom are you connected to? What are you consuming, whether that's through what you're watching, through what you're reading, through who you're connecting with, and what sort of conversations you're having with people? Because it's really easy to get caught up in a compare game. It's really easy to get caught up in other people's drama and bullshit. And when you start actually looking at that, and you start curating it, which is one of my favorite words, is whether it's you're curating where you're getting your news sources from, whether it's curating who you're following on Facebook or Instagram or whichever other social platform you're on. And you start removing some of that noise, if you like, that is not making you feel good. It's amazing how things can shift. One of the other things that I'm a big proponent of now, and God love my beautiful wife, it took her, said she didn't know what she was swiping right on. She'd be watching things on television that I just can't watch anymore, and I choose not to watch. Things that were, take Seinfeld, for example. It's really interesting. Ames used to watch Seinfeld over and over again, and I actually said, can you not watch it when I'm around? She's like, what do you mean? And I used to love Seinfeld back in the day. But one of the things that I find with it in particular, it's a good example of, it's really self-deprecating. It's actually quite mean. And so I just don't listen to that stuff anymore. I don't find it funny anymore. It hurts my heart to watch. And so anything that hurts my heart to watch, I tend not to these days. I still keep, there's certain news sources that I keep in touch with because I find it more fact-driven versus drama-driven. I don't watch a lot of mainstream media anymore. I don't listen to the radio because it stops my connection with self, because it actually brings in fear and doom and things that are low vibration, for want of a better way of describing it. So I talk a lot about that on my podcast, which is Aligned You. So that's ALIGNED, the letter U. You can find that on all streaming platforms. I'm finding more, which is interesting. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. People are listening to podcasts more on Spotify now than Apple podcasts, but that's a whole nother story. And in terms of my hands-on work, I love what I get to do in practice every day. It really does light me up because I get to connect with awesome humans. I have a very firm no dickhead policy in my practice. And people often ask who gets to choose, how do you determine? And it's like, well, I get to determine it. And if I'm the center of my my universe, and I consider myself normal, then the spectrum goes from there. And I get to help people in my practice here in Alexandria, which is called Mitchell Road Chiropractic, which you can find that on Instagram and Facebook as well. Aligned.u is on Insta and Facebook. And I think they're on my socials, or if you want to get more serious, you can find Dr. Maria Zuschmann on LinkedIn, which I'm about to use a little bit more as well. But yeah, that connectedness piece, it's something now that and perhaps this is also helpful for your listeners, is when we compartmentalize our life and we hold certain things in the shadows, for want of a better way of describing it, actually makes life quite difficult. I've found, particularly since I've incorporated all the aspects of who I am in my practice, and I can be exactly who I want to be in practice, it makes my connectedness to self and to others just so much more palpable and powerful. Whereas in the past, I used to keep them all so separate. I would keep who I was and who I was married to really separate. I used to have a practice down the South Coast, so I used to hide my sexuality. I didn't hide it, I just wasn't open with it. Whereas now, I mean, part of you ladies saw it when we were on camera before. There's a disco ball up in my practice, and part of why there's a disco ball up in my practice is because it's a leftover decoration from Pride this year, and I just think it should be gay Christmas all year round in my practice. So that's something that, I get to lean into all the aspects of me in my space. And that really allows me to stay super connected as well. So perhaps that's helpful for your listeners, is if there's areas in your life that you're not actually bringing in, it just makes it tiring, quite frankly. I find it anyways. Whereas when I get to live my truth and who I am, and I stay on my brand, I joke about that sometimes, but I stay on my brand, then life gets to be a whole lot more fun and a lot more playful, and brings a whole lot of joy and happiness.
I love it. I've actually got the quiz all ready to go, so I can do the quiz.
Fabulous.
So I've got that. So thank you very much, Maria, for giving so much information. That's what's mind-blowing. You didn't say, go here, go there. You actually spelt everything out for us. And now I feel like I am far more knowledgeable about you, about what you do, your incredible impact on humanity, and how you're helping not only your individual patients through example, and your brother through example, but obviously you are influencing a whole community. So on behalf of Kim and I would like to thank you for spending an hour with us on Up for a Chat.
Oh, you're so welcome. Anytime. Always happy to chat.
We love you.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.